book of Judges for today. Were there some parts of the book of Judges that you don't remember ever reading before? Any of those judges that you weren't familiar with?
Israel having war with the tribe of Benjamin.
Ah, yeah, that's an interesting event, isn't it? War with the tribe of Benjamin. What was that over?
I forget. I didn't write down, but I remember.
What happened that they all went to war against Benjamin? Nobody remembers? You just skimmed so quickly you missed that? Wasn't that where the priest was traveling with his concubine?
Yes.
And people, the men of the town took his concubine and raped her all night long, and she died on the doorstep of where he was staying. And so what did he do? This would be one of those things I would think would be unforgettable if you read it. No one knows what he did.
Didn't he chop up her in 12 pieces and send them to each tribe of Israel?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that infuriated the other tribes, and so they attacked Benjamin and had to be held off until they destroyed the tribe. Okay, what else? Anything else that you didn't know besides that one you didn't know even after you did read it?
Is that recording?
Yes.
Okay, so make sure. You remember?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Any other things that stood out? Matthew?
Well, what really like stood out was like how like the gods in the Bible like bow or fail, or how like just the connection from like them into like history, how like it just shows that they're like connected.
And that's why we do this class, so we do so you can see those connections between what the Bible says and what we know from history. Because you find Baal a lot in the book of Judges, you'll see him further in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Okay, so you knew about all those judges? All right, well, let's continue to look at Canaan at the time that Israel came into the land. We've looked at a number of the tribes that were in the land of Canaan prior to the Israelites coming in, and that was in flux. Some of those tribes came in, they left, came in. So those are some of the ones that were there in the land. But now we want to look specifically at what the situation is like as Israel is coming to the land of Canaan and are about to enter in. Here we see on this map how the land is going to be divided up once they come in and take over. Well, I guess we have talked about in the book of Joshua how they come in. I think we talked about that. So here you see how the 12 tribes are divided up by different colors. Notice that there are 3 tribes on the east side of the Jordan River. So they were all supposed to be over here, but these 3 tribes said, look, we found good land over on this side. As long as we promise to go in and help drive out the inhabitants of everybody else, let us come back and live here. And Joshua said, yeah, that'd be okay. So you can see the different tribes represented all through that area. North of the Sea of Galilee, all the way up here. Dan is one of the most northern points, all the way down to the Dead Sea. Here it's called the Salt Sea. And then down into what's called the Negev, south, the southern border. All right, now we're going to look at some of the tribes that were around the area. First of all, tribes to the east of Canaan. And we'll come back and forth and see where they are on the map. The first tribe is the Moabites. Now, the Moabites, you probably, anybody remember where they came from, who their ancestor was? All right, that's a little bit harder. Their ancestor was Lot. Do you remember Lot? Who was Lot? Lot was the nephew of Abraham. Do you remember when Abraham and Lot, their shepherds had a dispute, and Abraham told Lot, you pick some land and I'll go the other way, and that way we won't be sharing the same land. Do you remember that? And Lot picked the best land and then ended up moving toward what city? The city of Sodom. And what happened to Sodom?
It was destroyed.
It was destroyed. Did Lot escape?
Yes.
Yes. With whom? Looks like you never read it. Lot escaped with his wife and his 2 daughters. Why didn't his sons-in-law or future sons-in-law come with him? They thought he was joking when he said destruction was coming. And the angels basically had to drag Lot and his family out.
Oh, I remember this.
So Lot and his wife and 2 daughters are fleeing from Sodom. They're running away. The fire and brimstone starts coming down. And what happens? What does Lot's wife do?
She looks back at the city.
She looked back. And so what happened to her?
Turned to stone.
She turned to a pillar of salt, technically.
Oh.
Yeah, so Lot lost his wife. Then he and his 2 daughters went and hid in a cave. His daughters became, let's see, what's the word I want to use? Despairing over the prospect of never having a husband and never having children. I don't know if they thought it was the end of the world or whether they thought they wouldn't find husbands anywhere else. I don't know, because everything around them was being destroyed. So they made an agreement with one another that in order for them to have children, they would have to have sexual relations with their father. And so each in turn, one night and then another night, got him drunk, so he didn't know what he was doing, and they each had sex with him. They each bore a child. One of them bore a son whose name was Moab. So the Moabites are the descendants of this incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters. Things didn't get any better for the Moabites. They were born out of a very sinful situation, and they operated that way centuries later. They worshiped a god, and I'll show you where they are. The Moabites are over here, to the east of the Dead Sea, just below Reuben, to the east of Judah and Simeon. All right, they worshipped a god called Chemosh, and one of their distinctives was that they burned their own children in sacrifice to this god. They were a fertility cult. That is, they worshipped a goddess of fertility, and they thought the best way to worship the gods and goddesses that would bring them fertile land was by engaging in sex with prostitutions. So at the temples, to their gods, there were prostitutes that were there all the time. They were paid, and the men would have sex with them, and that was considered an act of worship. So the way they start out, it doesn't get any better. All right, then, who do you suppose the Ammonites are? The Ammonites come from a man by the name of Ammon, who is the son of the other daughter who had sex with her father Lot. And they don't do much better. They also worship a god by the name of Molech, sometimes called Milcom, who also sacrificed their children by burning. Let me read to you a little bit about this rite that they performed. An important rite in the worship of Moloch was the sacrificial burning of children. In excavations at Gezer, an archaeologist found the ruins of a Canaanite temple. Inside, he discovered hundreds of urns containing the bones of children from 4 to 12 years old who had been burned alive. Another horrible practice along this line was called foundation sacrifice. This called for the slaughter of a child upon the construction of a house. Its body that would then be stuffed into a wall to assume good luck to the remaining family. So, wonderful people, don't you think?
Lovely.
Now, one of the ways in which they, and maybe the predominant way in which they sacrifice their children, is they would have a statue of their god made out of iron or some other metal, maybe bronze, made out of metal, and the statue of the god would have his arms out like this, and the belly of the god would be open, and they would put wood in there to start a fire. So there would be fire in the belly of the god, and then, you know, what happens to metal if it's near fire?
It melts.
Well, if it's real hot. Otherwise, what happens to metal?
It gets hot.
It gets hot. Warmth or heat spreads through metal, right? So after a while, not only is it hot around the belly of the god, but everything about him is hot. And when his arms got good and hot, they would lay the child on his arms. And then the child would burn. So that's the kind of people that were living in that area east of the land of Canaan. All right, so see the Ammonites lived over here. So they are in the vicinity of a number of the tribes of Israel. And they're going to cause difficulties for Israelites. All right, any questions about the Moabites and the Ammonites? All right, now as we think about the entrance of the children of Israel into the land of Canaan, who is their leader? Who's the leader of the children of Israel when they come in and conquer the land? First come in.
Ball.
No, the leader of the children of Israel.
Joshua.
Israelites. Joshua. So Joshua brings them in and conquers much of the area, but then he eventually dies. So who becomes the leader after Joshua dies? That's right, no one. That's what you said, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one. And so then we come from the book of Joshua into the book of Judges, and we're told a number of times in the book of Judges that basically there was lawlessness in the land, there was no leader, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Do you remember reading that? Maybe sometime? Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so we have a problem, and that is the people are without a leader, without a physical leader, and they're not willing to follow God as their leader. So what happens in the book of Judges is we have what we say as a cycle. And it's reflected in Judges 2, but it continues throughout the book. So first they forget the Lord. They become self-reliant. Hey, we're doing pretty good. You know, we can rely on our own selves. But then, so they forget the Lord, then they forsake the Lord. They develop evil hearts. And so God brings trouble to them. Oftentimes it's through an outside tribe that invades the country, like the Ammonites, the Moabites. And so they are distressed because they're under the rule of some awful people. And so they cry out to God. God, deliver us, help us. And so God raises up a deliverer, quite often called a judge. And so the judge drives out the foreigners, restores peace, the people are thankful, and we have this period of silence for a while. They become self-reliant, forget the Lord, forsake the Lord, and they keep going the same cycle over and over again. Now this is over a period of many years, but they keep repeating the same mistakes, and God continues to send judges for them. We'll look specifically at some of those judges a little bit later. But next we want to look at the next people group that were around the area where the Israelites were living. We saw who was to the east, the Moabites, the Ammonites. We had the Edomites we've talked about before. They're down here. But when Israel came into the land, they didn't conquer everything. They only went so far, and they kind of petered out. And so we have people living over here to the east to the west, on the west coast, that are also going to be a problem for the Israelites. And those are the Philistines. You've heard of the Philistines. If you've read the book of Judges, you came across the Philistines. They were originally called the Sea Peoples. They were people that came from the sea, and they settled in that area. They invaded the coastline of Palestine. In fact, Palestine comes from the word for Philistine. So really to use Palestine before this time is an anachronism, but since then we use that term. They were sea peoples that many think originally came from Crete. So here's Crete, see south of Greece, over here is Asia Minor. And then this direction would be the land of Canaan. They left Crete and possibly went to Cyprus. There's some indication, some historians believe that they didn't even come from Crete, that they came from Cyprus, at least directly. Maybe they've been in Crete before. But here's the island of Cyprus. And so from Cyprus, for some reason they left, and we don't really know why, and came down to Egypt. They invaded Egypt looking for a place to live. Do you need something?
Yes.
Because I'm recording right now.
I
So
need
make it
to-
quick.
Okay. I don't know if I can stay after school because we have to go take my dad to see the doctor. He's not very well, so
Okay.
I wouldn't have a ride.
Can you tell Jonas then?
Jonas,
And who else was Jamie? No, sorry. Who was the other person?
I don't know who it is.
Oh, no. Well, those of you at home are probably wondering what's going on, and I don't know if I can tell you. After school activity that apparently is going to be changed now because of a medical situation. All right, so we're looking at the Philistines. They apparently came from Cyprus down to Egypt, tried to invade Egypt, and were turned back. There's some thought that they were distantly related. The Philistines are Hamites, so there is a relationship there. Whether that had anything to do with them coming down to Egypt or not, it's unknown. They're both from the line of Ham. But the Egyptians beat them back, so they weren't successful. So they're looking for some place to live. We don't know why. For some reason, they had to leave Cyprus, so they're looking for a place to live. And so they go along the coast, and they find that this area is one that looks pretty good. And so they end up settling there. Now, there's some indication that they may have also either were from up in this area to begin with, or some of them went that direction. Because there's an indication that people that lived in Anatolia were the same people as the Philistines. In fact, what we find some interesting things in the Iliad. How many of you have ever heard of the Iliad? Who wrote the Iliad? Homer, the great Greek poet Homer. He wrote the Iliad, and a lot of people think that the Iliad and his other work, the Odyssey, are simply fictional accounts. I don't think so. I think that these are his accounts of history in poetry form, and there may be some embellishments or maybe some exaggerations, but I think he's describing real events. And if you ever read any of those, you'll maybe see what I mean because of the great detail that he gives to events and the people, telling exactly who these people are, who they're related to, all that stuff. I think some of you would do that if you're just writing a fictional account. So anyway, in the Iliad, in Book 2, it mentions people called the Pelasgians, who are allies of Troy. Remember, the Iliad is concerned with the Trojan War. You've heard of that, I hope. And these are probably Philistines. At the beginning of the Iliad, there is a story of pestilence which is dealt with in a similar way as we see in 1 Samuel 5 and 6. And there's a similar story of Megaran King Nisus, who had a lock of red hair that gave him strength. Does that sound like anybody you know?
Samson.
Yeah. And his deceitful daughter shaved his lock and betrayed him to King Minos of Crete. So similar event there. Goliath has been compared to a man by the name of Alyattes, who founded the Lydian Empire. The description of Goliath's armor that we find in the Bible is similar to Greek warriors in the Iliad. The battle of David and Goliath is similar to the story of Hector and Achilles in the Iliad. So a lot of similarities in stories, similarities in armor, and other artifacts that have been found from the Philistines are similar to what is found up in this area. So they apparently were a part of the Trojan War, and for some reason after that, either settled in Cyprus originally, then moved, or they were from there and forced to leave. Maybe it was an earthquake. Don't really know what happened there. All right. So they eventually settled along the coastal plains, and they formed a 5-city league. So along here, they started 5 cities that were allies of one another. They were Gaza. You see Gaza? Right there. And Ashdod. Right there. Ascalon. Right here. Ekron. Which I'm not seeing. Ekron. Ekron. Where are you? Okay, it must not be on the map. It's there somewhere. And Gath. I don't see Gath either. Oh, there it is. There's Gath. And am I missing Ekron? Anybody see it? Okay, so there are 5 cities in this area right here that were Philistine cities. And a lord ruled over each city. Well, these newcomers to the area, they weren't there before the Israelites came to the land of Canaan. So, basically, not exactly the same time, but as the Israelites are coming in from this direction, well, then when the Philistines come here and they start pushing in from this direction. And so the Philistines become great enemies of Israel. And by 1100, they had pushed back Judah's border and surrounded Israel. For a time, after 1050 BC, they virtually ruled Palestine. So they took over. They controlled the areas even in which the Israelites were living. They even at one time captured the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the center of Israel's homeland. Well, the Philistine menace was greater at first because they were not fighting battles. They were using an indirect approach. The Moabites, the Canaanites, the Midianites, and so on, they would be ones that would attack and be very aggressive and cruel. But the Philistines didn't approach it that way at first. Their domination came because they tried to be friends with the Israelites. They tried to intermarry with them. And it seems to work because you find in the book of Judges, for example, when Samson is going out against the Philistines, the other Israelites are mad at him. What are you doing? We're friends with these people. Don't upset the apple cart. So apparently the Philistines were able to infiltrate. But when they did get the battling, when they did fight, because there were fights, as we see after the time of Judges and the time of Samuel and Saul and David, they had an advantage because they possessed iron smelting. That is, being able to heat up iron and make it into the different shapes you would need, and particularly spears and arrows and things like that. Now, they learned smelting iron from the Hittites. And then once they had that, after they enabled, after they took this discovery for themselves, they prevented other people from being able to do it. So when they were in control of an area, they would not allow anyone else to do any smelting of iron. The Philistines are also known as the great boozers of their time. They consumed great quantities of barley beer. They produced handsome mugs from which to drink the beer, and some of them were fitted with a filter because, being kind of homemade style beer, it would have sometimes barley husks floating on top, and so they had a filter on these mugs to filter out the husks so that they wouldn't be drinking that. So kind of innovative, but that's one of the things that we found a lot among Philistine remains, and that is beer mugs. Now let's talk about the religion of the Philistines. They were very religious, and they worshipped a god called Dagon, who was their grain god. Now, you might wonder, why does a grain god have the body of a fish? Well, I think this goes back to the time when they were the sea people, when they lived on the sea. And now that they've come to live on land and grow crops, they sort of retain that old-fashioned idea that they had of their god Dagon. Interesting that the word Dagon in Hebrew means grain. So that may have been the Hebrew translation of what they called their god when we read it in the Bible. But the word dag by itself means fish. So interesting combination of the fish and grain god together. Dagon led his people in warfare. He is considered to have provided for the fertility of the land and the populace. He protected the territory from human and divine encroachment and took special care of the royal family. More interestingly, Dagon kept contact with his people by means of prophetic communication. So there were prophets that had messages from Dagon. Professional and non-professional prophets would report the will of this deity through those whom the god seized for such communications. So they would go in some kind of a trance, and they would speak out the words of Dagon. The Philistines celebrated their victories in the house of their idols. So they built temples, and when they had a victory, they would go in their temple and celebrate, have a party in there, and they often carried their gods into battle. All right, now let's look through some of the judges that you encountered in the book of Judges. No, we're not ready for that yet. Sorry. In the Bible, I'm talking about the Philistines still. We have Shamgar and Samson. Well, there's Samson. Fought with the Philistines. They were eventually driven back to the coast by Samuel. Jonathan, the son of King Saul, defeated them. David fought with them. Saul lost to them and was killed in the battle. And then by the time of Solomon, they were totally subjected. Okay, let's look at now some of the other judges that you encountered. Here we have Samson, a painting done of him being blinded by the Philistines. You recall that. And then after that, he was brought into the temple of Dagon for the celebration that they had of their victory. Maybe been another battle, but also victory over him. And he asked to be brought to the two main pillars of the temple. And remember what happened? God gave him strength again, and he pulled those pillars, and the entire temple collapsed on the Philistines, killing thousands of them. And so it is said that he killed more in that one act leading to his own death than he had all through his life. And he killed a lot in his life. So here's a drawing that someone's done of Samson destroying the temple. On the next slide, we see a drawing of, can you tell?
Goliath.
No?
David.
Can you tell what they're doing here?
Blowing a horn.
He's blowing a horn, we've got torches, here's broken pitchers.
Protesting.
Who was it that God kept reducing his number of soldiers until he
Gideon.
only had 300?
Gideon.
Gideon. And then they weren't supposed to go into battle to fight, but to put a torch inside of a pitcher and have a horn. And at the same moment, they were to break the pitcher so that the flame is visible to all the Moabites, and also blow the horn. And what happened? Well, the Moabites thought that they were surrounded by a huge army, because if you have that many torches out there, think how many more men there must be. If you have that many trumpets out there, how many more men must there be for each trumpet? Not knowing that there was only one person for each trumpet. And so what did they do? The Moabites ended up killing each other in the confusion. And so Gideon was successful. God brought victory. One of my favorite judges is a guy by the name of Ehud. Remember reading about him?
No.
It's called the left-handed Benjamite. A lot of the Benjamites were left-handed. It worked to his advantage here as he was dealing with a foreign king, King Eglon, who had taken over that area of Israel. And he asked for an audience with the king. They checked him out, but they assumed that he would be right-handed like everybody else. And so from the right hand, he would draw from this side any sword or dagger. Well, being left-handed, he had it on that side, and they didn't check there. So when he was alone with the king, he pulled out his dagger and stabbed the king in the belly. And the king was so fat that his fat covered the blade and the handle of the knife. So he killed the king and snuck out another way and was victorious there. So that's Ehud. And there are a lot of other judges there as well that you have read about. That brings us next to a period of time which we call the United Kingdom. And that is, finally the people of Israel demand from God that they have a king. From whom did they demand that, do you know? To whom did they say, we want God to give us a king?
Gideon.
No? Actually, they tried to make Gideon a king, and he refused it. This is much later. It was the prophet, who was also a judge, Samuel. He was also a priest. Samuel, remember Samuel? Now, as a boy, his mother brought him to the tabernacle. He was raised by the priest there, Eli. And then he grew up to become a leader in Israel, the prophet of Israel. And the people said, all the other countries have a king. We want a king too. And so Samuel went to the Lord, and the Lord said, you know, Samuel, don't feel badly. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. So I'll give them a king. Tell them it's not going to go well, but I'll give them a king. And so God selected their first king in the United Kingdom of Israel. And we call it that because of what would happen later. And who was that? Oh, I spoke too soon. Who's the first king? King Saul. You need to remember that. King Saul is the first king of Israel. He is from the tribe of Benjamin. He was a good-looking guy, a big, strong guy. And so people liked him as a choice for king. But what happened? You know, John?
Didn't he destroy a nation and then took some of the things they had and kept them for their own? He was supposed to give them to God.
Right. Yes, he was supposed to destroy, in this one battle, he was told to destroy all the people and their animals. And instead he kept the king alive, and he kept the animals. And Samuel got there and said, what's going on, Saul? And Saul said, well, the people wanted to have the animals to sacrifice to the Lord. No, that's not really true. And Samuel says to him that to obey is better than sacrifice. To hearken is better than the fat of rams. So you should have obeyed. And then Samuel went in and took a sword and cut off the king's head. But unfortunately, because of Saul's actions, there is a baby who escapes. Someone takes a child of that king's family and escapes. And we'll talk about it later, but years and years and generations later, a descendant of that one that escaped is going to come very close to wiping out all the Jewish people. We'll talk about that when we get to it. All right. Another time, Saul was going to go into battle, and he was waiting for Samuel to give an offer a sacrifice to God, to bless them, to ask God's blessing on them as they go into battle. And Samuel didn't come, and Saul kept looking at his watch. Where is he? Where is he? Said he'd be here by now. He's not here. He's not coming. And so finally, Saul offered to sacrifice himself, which was something only a priest was allowed to do. Well, just then Samuel came and said, "What's going on, Saul?" "Well, you weren't here, and so..." "Yeah, but you disobeyed God." So because of this disobedience of God, God told Samuel to tell Saul, "I'm going to take the kingdom away from you, and I'm going to give it to another." And so Saul continued to rule for some number of years after that. But in the meantime, Samuel anointed someone else to be king. Who is that? David. And we'll find out some more about David and what happens to the kingdom of Israel next time. Now, you can start working on something for Monday if you like. It's for extra credit, so you don't have to do it because it's so long. But if you want to do some reading in 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings, this time, just record how much time you spend reading in it, and I'll give you 5 points for every half hour. Don't do that instead of other work. I mean, work that you have to do first. But if you have some extra time and you want to get some extra credit points, you can read in, and you don't have to read the whole thing. Whatever you read will count. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Okay? And that will be due on Monday if you choose to engage in that. Okay, you're dismissed.
80 points extra. Put babies involved.